Today we are going to be looking at the area of competition law in the European Union. In an increasingly business-driven world, the success of a country is largely defined by the success of its industry. Thus, it is important for countries to put in place a regulatory structure that permits and encourages businesses to operate freely in a competitive environment. The fundamental role of competition law is to maximize consumer welfare or benefit. In the United States, the notion of consumer welfare is usually defined narrowly in economic terms. However, under European Union competition law, the notion of consumer welfare is defined more broadly, taking into account the specific aims of the European Union, for example, the promotion of the internal market and other general socio-economic aims such as increased employment, regional development, and environmental protection. Thus, EU competition law is not just interested in anti-competitive behaviour per se, but rather anti-competitive behaviour in the context of the European Union. The basic provisions of EU competition law are set out in Articles 101 to 109 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. Competition control in the EU extends to four main areas: restrictive agreements, monopolies, state aid, and the control of concentrations. Let's take a look at the area of restrictive agreements. Article 101 applies to restrictive agreements or concerted practices between undertakings that seek to distort competition. Restrictive agreements are referred to as conspiracies in US competition law. Article 101(1) of the TFEU establishes several examples of the type of agreement or concerted practice or behaviour between undertakings coming within the prohibition. For example, agreements between undertakings to fix prices, to limit production, technical development, or investment. Agreements to share markets or sources of supply. The application of unequal trading terms to equivalent transactions. For example, if an undertaking favours one trading partner over another. And finally, tying, i.e. conditioning an agreement to the acceptance of unrelated additional obligations. For example, a manufacturer of a popular mobile phone that ties the phone buyer to using a particular mobile telephone network. Pursuant to Article 101(2), agreements coming within the prohibition set out in Article 101 are immediately void. However, it is possible for an agreement that is void under Article 101(2) to be exempted from the prohibition if the agreement creates a benefit for consumers pursuant to the terms of Article 101(3). Now let's look at the area of monopolies. Article 102 applies to the abuse of dominance, referred to as monopolization in US competition law. Article 102 is not aimed at preventing market dominance, but at the abuse by any undertaking of a dominant market position. Article 102 establishes an open-ended list of practices that might be considered abusive. For example, if a dominant undertaking imposes unfair prices or other trading terms on market operators. If a dominant undertaking limits production, markets, or technical development in a way that is harmful to consumers. If a dominant undertaking applies dissimilar conditions to equivalent transactions, thereby provoking competitive disadvantages. Or if a dominant undertaking subjects commercial relations to supplementary tied obligations. For example, a manufacturer in a dominant market position that bundles a number of products together, forcing consumers wishing to access one of the products to also buy the other products. This is called horizontal tying and can extend a monopoly held by the manufacturer in one product to other products in which no factual monopoly is actually enjoyed. Although the examples listed in Article 102 are similar to those established in Article 101, Article 102 fundamentally differs from Article 101 insofar as, firstly, Article 101 applies to agreements between undertakings, and secondly, Article 102 has no exemption mechanism. Now let's look at the area of state aid. European Union competition law also applies to the area of state aid. Article 107.1 of the TFEU provides any aid granted by a member state or through state resources in any form whatsoever which distorts or threatens to distort competition by favouring certain undertakings is incompatible with the internal market. Thus, pursuant to Article 107.1, Member States may not grant their home industries aid where 1. The aid is given by a Member State and distorts competition, 2. It has an effect on trade between Member States, and 3. Confers an advantage in a specific industry or economic sector. However, not all state aid is prohibited. For instance, it is allowed to give state aid that has a social character or function, that promotes economic development or cultural activities, or state aid that is granted in response to a national disaster. Finally, let's take a look at the area of concentrations. The EU competition authorities are empowered to control concentrations, for example, a merger, or an acquisition or takeover, or a joint venture. Merger control is exercised by the European Commission pursuant to the terms of Regulation 139 of 2004. Although the competition law provisions set out in the TFEU apply to undertakings in general, a limited exception is made for public service operators. Pursuant to Article 106 TFEU, undertakings tasked with performing activities of a general economic interest, and by this is primarily meant public services, shall only be subject to the competition law provisions of the treaty insofar as the application of such rules does not obstruct the performance in law or in fact of the particular tasks assigned to them. Thus, under EU competition law, public services are allowed some protection from the market to ensure that they can perform their basic function. Now, let's take a look at the enforcement of EU competition law. Regulation 1/2003 provides for sharing the enforcement of EU competition law between the European Commission and the different member state national competition authorities, referred to as NCAs. Enforcement of competition policy at EU level is carried out by the European Commission's Directorate General for Competition. Regulation 1/2003 grants the Commission enormous powers in the area of competition law. It is effectively a one-stop shop for competition control, and it is the Commission that decides when to investigate, when to prosecute. It is the Commission that attributes guilt and also the Commission that applies sanctions. The Commission may begin an investigation either on its own initiative, i.e. ex officio, at the request of a complainant company, or at the request of a member state. If the Commission decides to carry out an inquiry, it first holds a preliminary investigation. At this stage, it may require verbal explanations from the company or corporate officers as to the undertaking's behaviour, and may also visit the offices of the undertaking under investigation. These visits can be carried out as raids, i.e. no warning given to the parties, and may extend to the premises of the businesses under investigation as well as to the homes of the corporate officers, management, or directors of such companies. Normally, the Commission is required to have a search warrant issued by the relevant national authorities, except where it has particular grounds for believing that evidence may be lost in the time taken to apply for the warrant. Once the preliminary investigation has been completed, the Commission then decides whether to continue the investigation or not. If it decides to continue the matter, it then draws up a Statement of Objections, an SO, to which the parties have a right to reply. The SO defines the scope of the Commission's case and the facts on which it will base its decision. At this stage, the parties have a right of access to the investigation file and may request a hearing at which third parties also have a right to attend and to be heard. If the matter is not settled, the Commission will then consult with the Advisory Committee on Restrictive Practices and Monopolies, made up of Member State civil servants, prior to formally adopting a decision on the matter. Article 23 of Regulation 1/2003 provides for the imposition of significant fines on companies found guilty of violating EC competition law, up to 10% of group global turnover. Undertakings can also be required to cease and desist certain behaviour, and failure to do so will also lead them to the imposition of daily fines until they change their behaviour as required. Companies can, at the investigation stage, commit or undertake to change their behaviour, and the Commission under Article 9 of Regulation 1/2003 may adopt a decision binding the parties to their commitments and then close the file. This is referred to as a commitment decision in EU jargon. Finally, let's take a quick look at the area of whistleblowing. A whistleblowing policy has been developed by the Commission to encourage companies to report the anti-competitive behaviour of other companies. Pursuant to the Commission Notice on Immunity from Fines and Reduction of Fines in Cartel Cases, 2006, if a cartel member informs the Commission as to the existence of the cartel in which it is participating, the member or whistleblower may receive a reduced fine or even be granted immunity in return for the information it provides. Under Commission methodology, the first cartel member to confess to participating in the cartel and that provides material evidence as to the existence of the cartel receives total immunity from any subsequent fines imposed. Thereafter, the second whistleblowing cartel member to provide significant evidence receives a reduction of between 30 to 50% as regards the fine that is eventually imposed. The third cartel member to confess, instead of receiving immunity, is fined, and so a significant premium is placed on being the first undertaking to break cover and to contact the Commission. We hope you enjoyed this introduction to the area of competition law in the European Union.